Thank you very much for joining me on our podcast. Rob, you're a lecturer in management at Stanford Graduate School of Business, where you teach not one, not two, five courses. And it's a lot of courses, I can tell you from my own experience. You're a general partner at Xseed Capital and venture partner at PIVA. He also sits on more than half a dozen companies' boards. So once again, Rob, thank you very much for joining me on this show.
Thanks, Ash. It's great to be here.
So, Rob, the theme of this session is digital leadership. How do you show leadership in those times when everything that we spent hundreds of years building all of a sudden becomes irrelevant? And how do you show leadership and reinvent and restart and retrain and reskill the entire organization or entire nation? If I invoke Ray Dalio's principles of life and work. So there are principles that guide the leaders and people in living the life and leading the businesses. What are some of those principles that organizations can follow post-COVID era to be successful and ensure that any such pandemic doesn't disrupt their success in the near future?
I think we have to look at it at two different levels. There's the level of the organization, and then the individual as the leaders inside of the organization. The organization's conventional wisdom is what the pandemic has done was accelerate trends that were already happening. And so, as we've talked about in the past, Ash, we were seeing companies that were really increasingly blending digital and physical. Not only did large incumbent organizations have to figure out how to start to use data and information in blending goods and services to their customers, but you'll see technology companies moving into industries that previously they didn't go into, whether it's mobility or healthcare or financial services. And so that's creating an acceleration of bringing these two competencies and skill sets together. And so that's only been accelerated. You look at a company, in retail, let's look at Target, which has done quite well during the pandemic, largely because they were able to increasingly blend their online shopping experience with the in-store experience, allow people to get the goods and services that they need. Now, obviously, Zoom, it has had an amazing run. And what's interesting is Zoom is impacting industries that were not expected. I have taught now 6 courses through this. And so what will happen as we come out on the other side is that this digital experience will be in addition to the in-person experience. It's gonna, we'll blend digital increasingly inside of the classrooms. I will continue to do a lot of, public speaking and executive education from home here in my home office because we have the ability to have much further reach than we did before. These technologies and trends were already there, but we're seeing how organizations kind of have to really run towards the disruption, which gets to the second part of what leaders need to do. Leaders have got to be kind of making hard decisions on, what are they going to invest in their organization, and what are they going to choose to say, hey, that's no longer going to be as relevant, and we're not going to emphasize as much. They've got to become infinitely more familiar in the technologies of artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing, analytics, and trying to understand how that's going to impact their business. Leaders also need to make sure that they can shape their organization and understand how are their workers going to work and how will they keep in touch with their workers and how will they design an organization that will meet the workers' needs where not everyone's going to be going to an office every day anymore. And the last part I would say that the hardest of it is leaders need to be able to do this in times of extreme uncertainty. When I teach a class, I was trained to be a teacher. I know what's going to happen. And some days I'm better than others, and some days my jokes are funnier than others, and some days I connect better with my students than others. But I know what to do. It was an apprentice business. And what most business leaders are going through right now, even if they think they're doing all the right things, we don't really know what's on the other side, and we don't know how it's going to play out. And so leaders need to figure out how to navigate through this crisis and through what will be an ongoing crisis with kind of putting off that sense of confidence, but also being able to understand that both they and their employees are really dealing with a lot of uncertainty at this moment in time.
So what you're telling me is that the intersection of goods and services, because it's going to be primarily service-led goods or some sort of that hybrid model Did people not understand the importance and usefulness of that model before, or it is just COVID has accelerated that need?
I think it's more that COVID's accelerated it. And every product will be connected at some level, right? So you'll be able to get ongoing information about products from your customers, see how they're using them, and then design better products because of what you learn and how you see their engagement. And I think that the companies that have done well during the pandemic were the ones that had already done that work up front. They're the ones that had already laid the foundation. And if companies hadn't laid that foundation already, their competition's pulling away from them. So I don't think that there's anything necessarily new, but it's kind of like necessity's become the mother of invention. And so all of a sudden we're now, rushing towards the disruption at an even greater pace than we were before.
I used to sell big, large machine for an manufacturer in mining and oil and gas industry. And then we also used to sell parts and services alongside. And one project that I undertook was, how do I monitor the consumption of parts on a machine and take that feedback into the design of the product? If I can take that feedback to the product team and tell them that you need to have a better chemistry of a wear part, it was insanely difficult. But today, the same thing is happening really effectively. So I think all the companies are looking at it very differently.
Well, I would suggest that it's even potentially even broader than you just articulated. I mean, Target was the example I gave, and we can talk about industry and we can talk about manufacturing, mobility. But like one of the examples I love to give, let's look at the media industry. And this is an example actually that goes back prior to the pandemic. If anybody watched, the original show on Netflix, House of Cards, in the very first episode, in the very first scene of the very first episode, there's this very, very intense scene where the character is talking to the camera and a dog gets hit by the car. And you hear the dog whimpering, and the lead character, the Kevin Spacey character, ends up killing the dog, right,
Yes.
to put it out of its misery. And like as a viewer, you're watching this going, oh my God, this guy's horrible. And this is before we knew everything about Kevin Spacey. And so what happened was there were a lot of people who stopped watching the show at that moment in time. And because Netflix was delivering the content over the top, they knew how many people stopped watching the show. And they could actually go back and adjust the content. They were trying to be edgy and push some envelopes, but they realized they had gone too far. And so they were able to shape the content. Not that the data told them, hi, we want a character who looks like this, or we want this ending. But they realized that in some of their edgier scenes, maybe they were going to lose some of their audience, so they were able to dial it back. And so whether it's retail or heavy industry like you were talking about, or even media, the ability to have connected products that can give us information about how our customers are using our products allows us, if we do it right, to deliver better customer outcomes.
It's like you can capitalize on your strengths and you can work on your weaknesses and pivot, like a constant change. And by that extension, I remember one class where you were teaching venture capital financing and why it makes more sense for a VC to not invest the whole 100 million in one stage versus doing it in multiple rounds. It is better because you have more visibility, you have better risk coverage, and you can adjust. And it's good for founder as well, because then the next round will come at a higher valuation potentially, and they will have lesser dilution.
Yeah, I think that we're going to see industries increasingly behave like what you just described, which was basically real option theory in finance, is how venture capital works. And it's that ability to you put in enough capital to get more information so then you can make the next best decision as to what to do. And so when you have that ongoing connection with customers, you're going to be constantly iterating, constantly improving. And I think that's going to be the nature of how, it's not like you ship something and then it's out there. You don't have to worry about it for 3 years till you ship your next one. It's going to be that ongoing contact and ongoing connection, which is actually going to also tax organizations, right? Because that can be very tiring to have that constant stuff coming at you and knowing you have to be constantly changing. But the problem is your competition's doing it. So if you don't do it, it's an existential threat.
And COVID has given us that uncertainty, but it's not my individual uncertainty. It's like a collective uncertainty. I'm uncertain, and so is my competitor. It's only a matter of how do I figure out my uncertainty faster and better and longer as compared to my competitor.
Right. Every organization faces these challenges. And the thing I think about a systems leader, which is the course I teach with Jeff Immelt, my old boss from GE, the thing about what makes it increasingly a challenge is like your employees are also feeling that uncertainty. And so the leadership's got to, not only do you have to know how to play offense actually when you're out in the market and you're out in the world competing, but you've also got to make sure you have a fair amount of empathy for your team, because they're dealing with these issues and they're dealing with, humans don't like change. That's a big lie when everyone says embrace change, change is good. No, change sucks. Humans hate change. Now, the problem that we face as a species is change is now constant and increasing. So making sure that you understand that your employees might be having hard days with a lot of this, that's actually a skill set and competency that leaders also need to develop if they're going to be successful.
It wasn't less relevant before, but I think the importance of empathy, and I would go one step further and say love, is like, why would you not love your people?
Well,
Look, Rob,
I happen to concur with that, but I think everybody's going to have to internalize that in their own way. For some people, it's going to be easier for them to express that feeling, express that emotion, and express that caring. It's really funny. As you remember, like I have a reputation for being real hard on the students. They have to come to class on time. I expect them to bring their A game. And a student said to me one time, Rob, that's your tough love for us. And I'm like, tough? I'm a teddy bear, right? I'm in front of the class, I'm having fun. And she's like, no, you're terrifying. And I'm like, I'm the short, bald guy in front of the room. There's nothing terrifying about me. Like I met a student yesterday. We went for a social distance walk. We'd never met for the last 8 months. And he went, oh my God, you really are short. And I'm like, yes, I am. And so, but the thing about that is I will, Joel Peterson, who you may have had as an instructor as well. Joel is fond of saying, I always love the students. I don't always like them, but I always love them. And part of, I think, having the deep caring for your students, whether it's love or empathy, however an individual wants to describe it, is trying to actually make sure that you're trying to do what's best for the worker and teammate that you're working with. Not because you know what's better, but trying to help them succeed and help them be their best selves. That's what leadership is really all about. And I think just having that radar on high right now is really important. When the pandemic started a year ago, Jeff Immelt, who was a tough boss, right? GE was not an easy place to work when I was there. He kept saying to me, Rob, you got to tone down the toughness, right? You got to tone this down. The students, right? They're dealing with a lot of stressful things right now. Be aware of this. So like he kept coaching me to just be aware of that. And it was great advice, right? This was somebody who had been through a few more wars than I had been through, telling me that I needed to actually kind of make sure that I was appropriately leading at that moment in time.
But I think I've been on the receiving end of your tough love, Rob. I've been late to the class. And this goes back to kids' psychology. Kids tend to attach more with the parent who has been tougher, because that one actually cares. That one actually spends time.
And as business leaders, your job is to help your team live up to their greatness, whatever
their potential.
That and
exactly.
Skills are. And so that's your role as a leader.
I always say this to my team, that I know we all are a little broken. We all are dealing with something that nobody else is aware of. At least I can respect and trust your personal integrity, that you're going to do your best. But let me guide you in achieving your genius, achieving your true potential. And that's all I'm going to do. And if we all achieve our true genius, then there is nothing we cannot achieve as a company. It's easier to do when you're managing a smaller organization, but when it goes bigger, you have layers and it's hard to transmit that kind of vibe.
I think politics happen at all levels, but I would argue that middle management is either your greatest friend or your worst enemy. And so it's really important to make sure you hire well, give people good messages, and you just have to keep repeating it over and over and over again. And that's where culture comes a lot into organizations, and that's the role of leaders, is to be a guardian of that culture.
You mentioned the digital transformation and the need for industries across the board to change their business model and adopt these new realities. You have GE background, you know those industries very well. What do you think is going on?
I think in these industries, you have a lot of complexity, from product design to channel to some of these industries have been around for decades and decades, or even 100 plus years. And so you have kind of an osmosis or lack of an osmosis, right? There's these sclerotic layers that have built up inside of these organizations and inside of these industries. And so change becomes increasingly hard. And in fact, the industries built the structure in order to enable to scale so that you didn't have deviations, right? And so the lack of deviations allowed stability. And I think what's happening now is people are coming in with new ways of doing business. And the challenge for it is, like, the disruptors who are coming into these industries are not constrained by the old way of doing things, either organizationally or business model wise. And so they can really come at things in a different way. And so I think companies need to understand how they're going to need to change. The best business models combine great technology and great business model innovation. And so being open to that, I think, is a key thing. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons things have been slower to move. Now, the opportunity for the incumbents is because these industries tend to be slower to move. If you can get in front of that change, you can drive it inside of your industry. And so therefore, you have the ability to protect yourself from the disruptors who are coming into your industry. But it all starts with serving your customers better. Do you understand their business? Do you understand what they're trying to achieve? Do you understand the impact on the income statement and balance sheet of your customers' products, of the goods and services that you sell? Can you quantify that advantage? And so companies need to increasingly be looking for new ways of doing things. We've talked a little bit about, I'll be coming out with a book in the middle of the year that looks at what I call the brains and the brawn of how companies need to combine both of these things. And I would say that incumbent organizations historically, especially in heavy industry, have been very good at the brawn side. They've been good at manufacturing. They've been good at logistics. They've been good at operating at scale globally. But are they thinking about how they're harnessing creativity? Are they thinking about how they harness data? Are they thinking about how they take risks? And organizations are, in the future, the ones that will be successful, the ones that are going to be the ones that blend both of those things, because that's what's going to take to serve customers better.
I think proximity is one thing, that how you quantify the impact on your end customer, on their P&L by your product. And the better I understand that product and the value proposition, the better I can take that feedback and design my products better. So, for example, an automobile manufacturer, it still take decades to bring up any decent electric car unless a real disruptor comes in. So how do you solve that in those core industries, disruption is not easy?
Sure, but it's like it's never sudden until it is. So you look at how Tesla has completely upended the luxury car market in North America. Like, if you're Audi or BMW or you're Mercedes, like, you're getting killed by Elon, who is selling a car of substantively lower quality, according to JD Power, and the customers love it. And so all of a sudden, now you're on your heels having to respond to it. And so I think that the best leaders today, like in the old world, you used to be able to say, okay, here's the part of our business that does innovation, and here's the part of our business that runs the operations at scale. And you kind of kept them separate. And now the best leaders need to be able to do both at the same time. And that's hard to do. And you need to, as a leader, be able to manage at scale and know how to do things globally and how to be operationally great. And you need to know how to manage a small team that can run experiments and try things and see if something works. And it's those things, and developing those, if you will, that corporate DNA, those corporate muscles, to do them both at the same time, and to have leaders who understand both. That's how you can best defend yourself against disruptors coming in.
And that's how you balance right and left brain within your organization.
Exactly.
We often talk about change management, and it tells me that probably industries are a victim of almost too much leadership. Is that a right assessment?
Well, I think what happens is, and if you look at any successful organization, you have what Professor Robert Bergelman will often call induced strategic action, where you have a very tops-down mindset that tells the organization what to do based on a few key strategic objectives. And that's not really going to go away. But the and part of it, of what's coming in the future, is you see that the real power is coming from empowering those parts of your organizations that are closest to the customers. And that very rarely happens in the ivory tower of a corporate headquarters. And so it's the ability to say, look, I'm going to actually move power and decision-making authority to the endpoints of my network who are closest to the customers, and give people the ability to drive change. And so, you give people operating principles on how to take smart risks, but you got to empower people to do that. And so I think what you're seeing increasingly, like the power of networks is the ability to leverage speed to serve customers well, can only happen if both, information and decision-making authority resides at the endpoints of the network. And so, what you described, I think, is endemic to any large organization and has been for decades. I think what's different this time is with kind of a digital infrastructure and digital network communication and collaboration tools. You can do things so much better and so much more effectively. And so you end up having to hire great people and put them close to the customer and then allow them to do their jobs. And I think that's one of the biggest changes right now, because when you do that, the speed and the advantage you get from speed completely can upend and have a much higher coefficient of the variable for success than the ability just to control every little bit that happens.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Tell me the time when you as a VC heard a very interesting pitch from someone.
I think the best pitches, and my fund, we're seed investors, so we go in at the earliest stages when it's largely just an idea. And I think what you look for in investment is what's being proposed, is it a large market that can yield venture backable returns within the time frame of relevance for your fund? And do you think that this entrepreneur has the ability to make it happen? And do they have kind of something that differentiates it from other solutions that are out there? One of my most recent investments was one that I loved because it combined the best of two different industries, the beauty space and artificial intelligence and robotics. A very close friend of mine, an alum from the GSB, a woman by the name of Lynn Hubline, is a very, very successful leader of a beauty or a company called Skin Spirit. And she's built this into a big West Coast operation, hugely successful, unbelievable operations. And so she comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm actually helping a founder co-found this new company," where Lynn started telling me about the eyelash extension market. All right, Ash, you and I are not the customers for this market. But she starts telling me about this market where women across a wide variety of socioeconomic classes and a wide variety of industries are getting eyelash extensions put on in what's a very manual process today. Literally, a woman walks into a store and a lash artist will place eyelash extensions by hand, manually, on a woman's eyelashes. And a customer will go in every 4 to 6 weeks and spend a few $100s getting this done. I didn't know anything about this industry because I'm not the target market. But as Lynn was telling me about it, it was like, oh, and then she told me one thing. There are more lash extension stores in the United States than tattoo parlors. Right? It's a huge market.
I did not know that.
Exactly. Neither did I. Right? And so Lynn's telling me about this, and then she's saying that she had met this other co-founder who had come up with a machine that could actually do this manually. Would take something that's an hour and a half. Excuse me. She could automate the machine could automate it. So something that would take an hour and a half manually could be done in 15 minutes. And Lynn described it in the language of beauty, about how you could have still a rich experience for a woman that would come in, make her feel comfortable, give her, like going to the beauty salon, but also allow, to take advantage of technology and computer vision to do a great job for her. And I love that pitch, right? Because it was like, okay, technological innovation, customer need already proven, customer benefit was understood. And then I had two, as Lynn was describing this to me, there were two amazing entrepreneurs there. One who was a computer vision expert and one who was a beauty expert. And it was the perfect combination to go after a large market that was ripe to be disrupted. And that was one of those things where it was like, yeah, that's it. Like, that's one I want to back. And it's still hard, right? The company is still trying to get the technology to work and making sure everything can go perfectly. But if they can crack the technology and deliver a great customer experience, there's no market risk, because this is something that women are doing today on a global basis. So like, that was one that I remember was like something that I wasn't prepared for, something that I wasn't a customer of, but I could look at and go, oh my God, it just makes sense. And so that, I love stories like that and entrepreneurs who can see things that others don't see.
And when Lynn reaches out to you and tries to pitch you this quote unquote very different idea that you are not a target customer, and I'm trying to imagine how hard would it be for her to find a mission aligned investor.
Well, I think there's a little bit of difference here. This is an entrepreneur that I backed previously, that I've known for almost 30 years, who's had success and a tremendous amount of credibility, right? So Lynn walks into the room already as an experienced and successful leader. And I've learned to trust her over the years. I mean, and I also know that she's got all of the right attributes of an entrepreneur. She's brilliant. She's fiercely competitive. She's driven. Like, she's everything you want. That when an entrepreneur like that walks into the room, you're like, yeah, I want to back that person. I think for Lynn understands very much how an investor thinks. That it's not just that an investor is thinking, would I use it or not? The question is, can an investor see a good investment opportunity? And so I think sometimes we're constrained by our biases and our knowledge. By the way, we all are as a species, right? All of us. And I think that it's our ability to kind of break out of our N=1 mindset of, well, I would never do this, so I don't understand. Therefore, I'm not going to fund it. To, well, wait a minute. Are there attributes of this that look like it can make sense? And then you can start to understand, you can do diligence on the computer vision. Can the technology work? You can do diligence on the market. How big is it? And how much money is spent on it. And then you can do diligence on the entrepreneurs. Are these the entrepreneurs who actually have the ability and the skill sets to make this happen? And then if you do those things, yeah, like, why not? Yes. But you highlight a great point that our biases inhibit our ability to see things. I would hope that great investors and great entrepreneurs try to not be constrained by the biases that we all bring.
Fantastic. You answered my second question about how do investors find a mission-aligned entrepreneur that they can back and
Well, what do you mean by mission? Okay, so it's like that's such an overused phrase, Ash. Okay, venture capitalists are up there with parameciums and amoebas. They're the simplest creatures in the world. Venture capitalists do not change the world. Venture capitalists do not make the world a better place. Venture capitalists, their job is to make money for their investors. Full stop. You're supposed to look at business opportunities. This notion of being mission driven is this doing good and doing well, right? Especially you'll see it like in healthcare. I'm saving people's lives. That's awesome, right? It's a good thing. It still has to be, for an investor, a good investment opportunity if a venture capitalist is going to take that risk. Lynn's not a mission driven entrepreneur in this. She sees a business opportunity, right? The beauty space is not mission driven. The beauty space. I mean, yeah, I guess I could tell a story that we're helping people feel good about themselves.
Kind of.
Okay? No, preventing heart disease. Yeah, I get it. Solving, climate problems. I get it. Lynn just came up here as like a brilliant human being and said, I see a business opportunity. And so, like, I don't want to kind of couch this in the language of kind of social goodness. I just saw an amazing entrepreneur with an amazing business opportunity, and time will tell if we'll be successful or not.
Time will tell. But I will counter that point, is that everything, if you say that you're going to wear a business lens and you're going to review every opportunity with respect to market diligence, technology diligence, and entrepreneur, do they have that skill set or not? But then great business ideas, they don't get accepted or invested by all VCs. There are many great companies that have been passed by investors. Same set of market, same set of technology, same skill set, but still people pass on opportunities that end up getting really big.
But let's break this into two parts. Number one, knowing what's going to be successful or not ahead of time, that's just not possible. That would be foreseeing the future. And if that's the case, investing would be easy. Investing and being an entrepreneur, both those, they're hard businesses. I guess what I would say is, at the extreme, Mark Zuckerberg can sit there and say, we're bringing people together. We are allowing people to connect and build a richer life. Bullshit. He's selling ads and he's selling our data for their bottom line. And the question is, do you like the product enough to know that he's monetizing you? He's not a mission-driven CEO. He's not making the world a better place. They're basically, they have built a machine for monetizing all of us as individuals. We choose to participate in it or we don't. But there's no mission there. He's a fiercely competitive entrepreneur and now business leader.
That makes sense. But tell me a few things about how investors help entrepreneurs.
I don't think investors do help entrepreneurs. I think that's a big lie. Okay. At best, what you're going to be able to do is make a suggestion or two a few times a year, and you hope your CEO listens to you. And by the way, if you give your CEO 10 pieces of advice a year, you're wrong half the time. And so the CEO's got to figure out what are the 5 times that your investor is right, what time the 5 times your investor is wrong. But the investor is still going to pontificate. I think that at best, what we can do is we can be encouraging the entrepreneur when she or he is in the product development phase to be thinking about commercialization up front, because that's part of what makes a company successful is that, a good product and a good go-to-market strategy. And so if you think about it at the end, if you think about it in a serial process, that's kind of a recipe for disaster, because you kind of spend the time iterating on product and then you spend the time iterating on the go-to-market, and therefore you've elongated the whole thing. So hopefully maybe we can suggest to the entrepreneurs that they can do it, kind of in a parallel fashion. But in the end, the entrepreneur's got to make it happen. Like maybe we can make an introduction to a good commercial leader. Maybe we can kind of share some best practices on things we've seen. But entrepreneurs run their companies. Like the ability for when an investor says they helped an entrepreneur like that, come on, the entrepreneurs got it done, not the investors.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like, why would you invest in an entrepreneur who does not know how to parallel run, go to market and go to product, how to do market engineering along with the product engineering?
The entrepreneur itself may not know how to do it, but the question for an investor is when you're talking to that entrepreneur in the first meetings and you start to raise some of these issues, does the entrepreneur kind of embrace it and say, aha, you're right, I need to know that. I need to go bring on some teammates that can complement my skill sets to do it if they don't know how to do it? Or do they dismiss it and say, I'll deal with it later and it's not important? And you really want an entrepreneur, I call them the truth seekers, who have a fierce desire to get it right, but not be right.
Correct.
And so that's what you're looking for in an entrepreneur. But like I said, the reaction I have to it is I just don't believe that investors have that much impact on the influence of a company. If I give a great entrepreneur money and he or she makes a lot of money, like I was a genius for giving that person the money. And if the entrepreneur loses my money, I was an idiot for giving that entrepreneur money. But in the end, the entrepreneur's got to run the business. My job is to help when they call.
So when you have a conversation around the ratio of long-term value to cost of acquiring customers from a B2B space perspective, is that metric really relevant across the board?
Well, if you don't, broadly speaking, then let's kind of go back to first principles, which is you sell a product and you hope that you sell it for a higher cost than you make it for. And the difference is profit. And the more profit that you have, the more valuable your company is. And I'm not trying to be pedantic here, but the LTV to CAC is just one potential way to measure that, right? How profitable are you going to be? Now, there are going to be issues of timing, which will impact cash flows and everything else. But no, you don't have one figure of merit that applies across all industries. LTV to CAC is a great ratio for SaaS software businesses. Awesome. But that's not necessarily going to be the case in heavy industry unconnected products that don't have ongoing contacts with customers. Now, you might be thinking on an ongoing basis, to the extent that your products become connected, can you learn about LTV to CAC, and can you bring that mindset into what your go-to-market strategy is, what your pricing strategy is, the ability to sell customers more things over time. But yeah, there's no single figure of merit.
Correct. Okay. From startups' perspective, I've seen that happen. They go after valuation and they go after the number of people in the company as if it's a vanity metric. And in all that noise, the actual metric that matters, which is cash flow and growth rate, and like you said, a metric that can measure are you going to be profitable or not, that part gets lost. How often do you see that?
Well, so if you look at things like valuation gets at really two things: the amount of dilution that the existing investors and employees are taking when additional capital comes in, and then there's valuation as a lighthouse signal to everybody else as to how this company is doing and what it's worth. And often in the Valley, Aileen Lee, who coined the phrase unicorns, right? Unicorns, you want to be worth $1 billion. And that's like the magic thing. So a lot of times people will chase that metric. Um, and often that doesn't tell the whole story. Because, for example, you'll see companies that will have structured financings that will get that valuation, but the investors will have a 4x liquidation preference. And so the way that your financial waterfall will work for everybody who came before it may not be what you think it is. That a company may, again, this gets back to there's no one single metric to understand how a capitalization table lays out and who's going to make money in different scenarios. And so I think entrepreneurs need to be smart about trying to build a clean cap table with clean valuations and clean liquidation preferences. The people who do financings at that level are very, very smart investors, and they know how to protect their downside.
That makes total sense. Rob, we are coming to the end of the show. Just wanted to ask you in general about your upcoming book. I'm very excited to get my hands on that book. Tell me something about that book and why should your target audience should read it.
So the book looks at what I call the Brains and Brawn framework. I look at 5 attributes that are largely digital and associated with our brains, and 5 attributes that are associated with our physical aspects or brawn, and try to apply that framework to business. And the point being that companies and individuals can look at how their companies are doing on these 10 attributes and understand if they're bringing the best of these abilities to market. Or they're operating in particular ways. So for example, the brainy attributes. I look at the left hemisphere, which is using analytics. I usually look at the right hemisphere, which is about creativity. I look about the amygdala, which is about, do you have empathy and how to use empathy? I look about the prefrontal cortex, risk-taking. And then finally, I look at the inner ear, which is, how do you do balance between partnerships versus what you do inside? And I know the inner ear is not part of the brain, but cut me some slack, it's close. And then I look at the brawny side of business. I talk about your spine, which is logistics. How do you do with supply chain? I look at hands, the art of making things. How do you handle manufacturing? I look at muscles. How do you operate at scale on a global basis? I look at what I call shaping ecosystems, hand-eye coordinations, and can you actually drive the industry the way you want it to be? And finally, stamina. Can you survive over time? And so what I hope is that readers will be able to read their book and look at these 10 attributes and actually rank their company on a 1 to 10 scale on each of those attributes to understand where's the company doing well and where's it not doing well. And this notion of blending digital and physical, these 10 attributes, this is what I've seen in all the leaders that I've been able to study over the last 5 to 7 years at Stanford and see how companies are doing and bringing the best. Sometimes they're incumbents and sometimes they're disruptors. And then the end of the book talks about how systems leaders are the people who have to hold all of this together and the attributes of systems leaders who can be successful in a world that blends digital and physical.
Just fascinating. I never thought this way that we could actually have an anatomy of a company like Brain and Brawn, and it completely makes sense. I cannot wait to have.
I hope the readers find it useful.
I'm sure they will. I'm looking forward to it, Rob. And you said the release date is in June or July this
month?
It'll be out in July.
It'll be out July 27th.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
Available at Amazon and greater bookstores everywhere in the world.
Awesome. Good luck with that, Rob.
Thanks, Ash.